a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Amazing Arizonans with Mike Broomhead.
Very special podcast with two people I've known for quite a long time, and this is in honor of 9/11. We start with Mike Angeloni, who spent years with FDNY, and we'll get to the story of where you were on 9/11 in the days that followed. And Mike McAvoy and I became friends with this, both of us losing a brother, serving, yours in the fire department and your best friend in the towers as well. And the two of you don't know each other very well. I mean, you've met, but you don't know each other, which is strange to me because your stories mean so much to me. I feel like you two should be connected at the hip because when it comes to this day, you're such a big part of it. I want to start with you as a firefighter, Mike. You were medically retired in 93?
Yes.
But you, like most firefighters, stayed very connected to the New York Fire Department.
All my best friends are firemen.
So when 9/11 happened, and your story of watching the towers, but you're here.
Yes.
What happened with you that day as you watched it, knowing that some of the people you served years with were going to be in those buildings?
Well, needless to say, it was gut-wrenching. When I found out I was driving, and as you know, because you worked with me on a lot of construction projects, I do a lot of work for the Hillstone people. And
yeah.
As soon as I heard it on the radio, my first thought was, well, a plane crashed into the Empire State Building in 1936, and, you know, not that big a deal. And then I had heard that it was a jetliner. So I frantically pulled into what was then Bandera, which was a Hillstone restaurant, and I have keys to the Hillstone store, so I went inside and put the TV on and was shocked, just floored.
Did you, when you found out it was a jetliner, did you immediately think it was terrorism, or did you still think it was an accident?
I thought it was an accident at first, yeah.
And then did you see the second plane hit?
Yes, I did.
And immediately
I knew then.
Your mind. So that is to hear your story because you were in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened that same day, but you were watching it happen.
Mm-hmm. So I was in my office and I saw people like scurrying by my office. I'm just like, what's going on? I said, a plane hit the Trade Center. Again, you're thinking it's a Cessna, small plane. Is it windy? Like, you know, it's still a little like, why the hell did this happen? And then more people are going by, and like Mike said, I heard someone say, they think it's a commercial airliner. I'm like, what? So I got up from my desk. Now, our building was right on the water facing the Trade Center, you know, and I walked over, and the fire and smoke coming out of that building, I was like, oh, my God. I couldn't believe this. How did this happen? Get back to my desk, Mike, and as you know, I'm calling my brother's firehouse. My brother was on duty that day in Ladder 3, downtown Manhattan. No answer. Of course, there's no answer because they're going to be down there. And I tried my buddy. I knew my buddy worked in that building. I tried him numerous times. Cell phone, office phone, cell phone, office phone. And let's remember, back then, cell phones weren't what they are now. Mm-hmm. No texting, no emails, nothing. So, you know, and trying to find the radio on through work. We didn't have radios, but somebody did. And there was no information besides what so I got up from my desk, and I'm walking over to the windows, and there's 20, 30 people standing in front of these floor-to-ceiling windows. And all of a sudden, there's a scream, and people literally fell to the ground. And I was like, what happened? They said a second plane hit the Trade Center. Instantly, you know it's terrorism. I mean, planes had never hit that, no less 2 in 18 minutes. I'm like, oh, my God, that's terrorism.
So in the moments that followed, because the miracle of this for you, Mike, is, and we're all Mike, so I don't know if I should just call you Angeloni to make clear, but the miracle of this was air travel stopped, but somehow your wife got you a flight. How did you get out of here to get back to New York?
So, and God bless her. I mean, this is amazing. The minute it happened, she started calling. And if I remember correctly, she was on the phone for 11, 12 hours, just trying one airline after another. And somehow, during the whole thing, one flight left Sky Harbor, because when I walked into the airport, it was wall-to-wall people all over the floor. And it was crazy because I had my gear with me, so they all started partying like the Red Sea, and every Southwest employee that I passed, every gal said, "Can I hug you?" And it was just heart-wrenching. People were walking up, handing me cash, saying, "Please let me buy your lunch." And I don't know how she did it. I know this one flight left, I was on it, and I was there the next night, and there you go. I went right to work.
And I know that you didn't know Mike's brother, but you were familiar with his firehouse, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Worked with them often.
Yep. Played softball against them, and we're all brothers.
Yeah. Patty Brown was pretty famous.
Oh, yeah.
The captain. He was
one of the best.
One of the best firemen ever. Many awards, and he was my brother's captain, so.
When either one of you jump in, when you think about those first days, because the perspective to me it's not lost to me. When I talk to you, I think of you. When I talk to you, I think of you. You watching that happen and walking into New York while people were coming out of New York, and you doing your best to get back there. What was it like when you were just trying to find your brother and your best friend?
It was a horror movie. I mean, we were at my office and we're watching this happen. And Mike, I was at the window when the first building came down. I was staring right at it, and it disappeared in seconds. And this is a horror movie, except it's real. And I just stood there. I was in shock. There's no way you couldn't be in shock. I worked in the Trade Center. I worked on the 102nd floor. That whole building just disappeared. And I literally said to a guy working with me, 15,000 people just died. Had to be.
I don't think people can. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I've been to New York a number of times. I've been to the trade centers. You guys worked there for years and years and years. Anybody that's seen it on television, you cannot get a perspective on how big those buildings were until you're standing there, and you still can't believe how big they are. Nothing on TV or movies does justice to how immense those buildings were. So to watch them come down had to be.
It's the worst. There's a few worse times of that day and days following, but that's the worst ever. I can't watch that again without losing it, because my buddy was in that building. My brother was below it somewhere, and they're both gone. So, it's just horrifying. How quickly that building just disintegrated into rubble is beyond belief.
How long did it take you to come to the reality that they were gone? Because I know you spent some time searching when they had lists of names.
So, again, we were in Brooklyn, and people didn't know where to go, what to do, and people were panicking. And I just said, you know what? I'm safe here. Where do we go? And they shut down all the trains. There was no place to go. You're in Brooklyn. And people wanted, we'll walk over to Brooklyn Bridge. So we went outside, and people were coming out of Manhattan into Brooklyn, and they were covered in soot. And they looked like ghosts. So I said, I'm going back upstairs until the trains start running or until we know something more. So eventually the trains reopened. So I got on the subway to go into Manhattan, not knowing where I'd go or what I'd do. I thought I'd go home. I lived in New Jersey at the time, but something told me, go to my brother's firehouse. And that's what I did. I took a train as close as I could get to my brother's firehouse. But another worst part of that day was the train stopped and doors opened about 2 blocks from the Trade Center. There was soot a foot high from those buildings that had come down. There were human remains in that soot somehow, some way. And the doors open up, and the train's packed, and everybody you looked at was in shock. Like, oh my gosh. It fell all the way down into the subway, all this dirt and dust and soot, and here it is. And the doors open. Nobody got on, nobody got off. But it was just a really eerie feeling. And then the doors closed, and we went up a little further, and my brother's house was downtown, so I got off, and I started walking to the firehouse. When I got to the firehouse, I'm looking for faces I know. I knew a lot of the guys John worked with, and I came upon one guy, Billy, and I looked at him and said, what's going on? Have you been down? This is like 2:30 now, maybe 2 o'clock, somewhere in there. Can't remember exactly, Mike. And he was covered in soot too. And they had told, and maybe you know this too, Michael, they had told all the firemen to go back to their respective firehouses because they wanted to take a head count. They told them to stand down. They were also worried about more collapses. And these guys weren't happy that they were being told that because they want to get down to the rubble and dig out if anybody's alive. So he said, there's no survivors. He hesitated at first. He goes, we didn't find any survivors. And he goes, it looks like the moon. None of us have seen anything like this ever. And why would they? There's 2 buildings now, 107 stories high, have collapsed, one right after the other, full of people. So, and the phone's ringing in a firehouse, and this one fireman who's in the house watch, as you call it, answering the phone, goes, I'm not answering this effing phone anymore. Because he's telling it's people's wives, girlfriends, children calling, asking, where's my dad, where's my brother, where's my husband? And he just, I'm not answering it. So, it wasn't good. I knew something was wrong. So then he started going to hospitals. Because I also got my best bud, who worked in the first plane to hit. He was in that building, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'll find somebody in a hospital. So I spent time going back and forth to all the hospitals downtown. St. Vincent's, Beekman, looking everywhere. And it's the only time in your life where you want to grab a list, and hopefully your brother or best friend is on that list, because it means they're alive. And it never happened. And I called my friend Mike, who lived downtown in the West Village, because he worked downtown too, to see how he was doing. And he said, I'm fine, I'm heading home. And after spending more, I went back to the firehouse. There was no good news. And the firemen eventually jumped in their own cars and went back down to the Trade Center.
Which, in true heroic fashion, your brother was off duty. And didn't he jump in a cab with his gear? Mm-hmm. He didn't go in a fire truck.
No. The fire truck, he was, as Mike knows, he worked the 6 to 9 tour, and the guys come in early in the morning because none of them live in Manhattan. They live on the outskirts. They either come in the night before very early to beat traffic. So he was already in street clothes when the plane hit, and if the truck went out real quick, packed, and him and another fireman stood there and watched, and they said, okay, we got to get down there. And they put on their gear and flagged the cab and took a cab down to the Trade Center.
So hearing that story, you and I have talked a lot about this, but you guys trained to run into those. You lived for those situations where you were going in when everybody else was running out.
Absolutely.
When you saw those buildings come down, what did you think?
I'm sure I've told you this before, and I say it many times, but I was in Bandera, and when the first tower came down, in my mind, I could just see the guys going up the stairs and imagine the chiefs in the control center saying, ladder 2, engine 8, take this stairwell, and you guys take this stairwell, and let's get another company here. And you can just see it, in your mind, these guys going up. And when that tower came down, my knees got weak. I mean, I said to myself, God, we must have lost 200 guys here.
When you, ironically, wasn't it your last call as a firefighter?
My last call was the first Trade Center bombing. I retired right after that.
So was there a thought in your mind that had you not been medically retired, that you would have been one of the firefighters in that door?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Mike, I say this, and not just to make my brother a hero, because he was a hero every day of his life.
Yeah.
Since he was a kid, he was just that way, and that's why he became a fireman. There was no place he'd rather been that day than there.
I've heard you say that.
Absolutely.
No place.
That's why it's so weird for me that you guys don't know each other that well, because I've heard him say that when we talk about this almost all the time, that it's inconceivable to most of us that when something like that happens, that they can't think of any other place they'd rather be. Is that how you would have felt that day?
Absolutely. I mean, you're trained to do that job, and not a lot of people can do it. And it becomes a way of life. Once you've lived that, there's nothing else you'd rather do.
I have a story. After 9/11, I spent a lot of time on my brother's firehouse. I was sitting there one day, and they're making sausage and peppers, and there's like 15 guys at a table, and they just put it on the table. Mom, mom, mom. Here comes a call. The chairs are on wheels. Every chair goes flying out but mine. And everybody runs to what they got to do, right? Guys out in the street blocking traffic, guys putting their gear on, jumping on the truck, they're gone 25 seconds. And I started to cry. I go, this is why my brother loved this job, the adrenaline rush. So when that call comes in, bang, seconds, they're gone. To save people's lives, to help people. They don't know what they're going to get when they get there, but they're going to get there. My brother was also he drove a truck with a chauffeur. And he used to it was a game that they played to be the first unit there.
Always.
And he won all the time. It's like Johnny Mac is driving today. We're going to be there. We're going to beat Engine 5. He was in ladder 3. We're going to beat this other company to this fire or whatever it is. And so that's what they're all like, Mike. They're all, I read something about the security guy at Morgan Stanley, Richard Riscola.
Great story.
Amazing book written about him. But when the building came down, his best friend Dan Smith from the service was on the phone with his wife. And he said to her, I want to say one thing here. Men like your husband don't get old, sick, and die. They die heroes. And I read that, I think, in a Newsweek magazine or whatever it was, and I started to cry because that's my brother. He didn't get old and sick and die. He died a hero because he lived his life as a hero.
The camaraderie. That's even a poor word for it. One of the things I saw, that I saw in the documentary, in one of the documentaries, I don't know if you can even bring yourself to watching them, but there was a documentary that was done, and it followed one of the chiefs. They were doing a documentary on something else, and then the planes hit it. They were following him in the building. And throughout the course of the day, the two things I'll remember in this documentary was hearing people hitting the roof.
Ugh.
And you knew what it was when they hit. But the other part was when the firefighters knew they were going into those buildings, standing in the lobby and shaking each other's hands and saying, it's been nice working with you if we don't come back down these stairs.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's an amazing trait. Is that not just what's expected of you, but you would expect that of everybody you served with, that they would do that for you in an instant, and there's never a second thought that you're going to do it for them?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't do that job and do it well unless you have that, unless you've become that. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, you've given your life up every day. You go there and you're just ready.
So I want to talk about the aftermath and I'm trying to go in some kind of order, but different perspectives for you when you get there and you fight your way through the crowds and you finally have somebody get you through security and all the levels of security. You got your gear. What happens when you get to the rubble, when you get to ground zero?
I ran into a chief that I had gone to Proby school with. Sweeney was his name. And he was shocked. He looked at me and said, Angeloni, I thought you lived in Arizona. I said, I do. He said, how the hell did you get here? And I said, I'm here, Sweeney. Where do you need me? And he said, did anyone talk to you? I said, yeah, I spoke to Danny Nigro's office. He goes, let me take you to headquarter tent. So he took me to the tent. Chief said, Mikey, I need you over here. And that was it. Went to work.
And what did you do?
Dig. Just on your hands and knees and
for how many
buckets. Days? I had done a variety of things. So I was there for 9 days. I dug some days. We were putting fires out Friday after it happened still in surrounding buildings. So I was on a hose line sometimes. I mean, I went to other firehouses to console some of the brothers that, lost their brothers, and, you just did whatever you were asked to do and went to funerals every day.
In your mind, was it ever a rescue mission or was it a recovery mission from the beginning? Was there hope?
My wife tells this story better than anyone. I finally had called her several hours after I had gotten there, and she said to me, did you find anyone? Because before I had left, at least a half a dozen old-timers that I had worked with called me and said, Mikey, are you going? And I said, yeah, I'm going. And he said, find my boy.
Oh.
Because their sons were firemen. Mm-hmm. And when I spoke to my wife, she said, did you find anyone? And I said, we're not going to find anyone here. We're just not. I said, Kat, this is the two biggest office buildings on the planet, and there's not a desk, not a chair, not a pencil. I mean, it was just mush and rubble, and it was disheartening.
When I went into my brother's firehouse, that's what they said. They said they knew I worked on Wall Street. They knew I worked in the Trade Center, And they said, where are all the file cabinets? Where are all the toilets? Where are all the chairs and desks? Because there's nothing. There's nothing left. And I don't know if you heard this, but one guy who my brother taught, speaking of probie, he was a probie under my brother. He said to me, there's a sound that I'll never ever let go of. And it was the sound of the fireman's pack beeping underground, because it gets louder and louder as you're going to lose oxygen. And he said he was walking on the rubble that night, and that's all he heard. Or that day, he could hear the beeping, knowing that. So how hard is that? You know there's people there, but yet they're disintegrated, or you can't get to them because the steel was there, but nothing else. Papers. They said there's papers, but there's no desks.
So once it became a recovery mission, you knew you weren't going to find anyone. Why was it so important to you to keep digging?
I mean, you know you're not going to find anybody because that's what logic tells you, but your heart tells you to keep going. Mm-hmm. And, you know, whether it be for yourself or for the families, you want to get something. You want to get a coat, you want to get a helmet, you want to get a badge. That's what we're supposed to do. You know, I imagine that's what motivates you, is that feeling inside of you. You know, they're my brothers down there.
And so that's where, for you, what it meant to your family for them to find your brother.
We wanted to have a burial. Not just, we had a wake the first time. We didn't have a burial. We didn't have a casket. So we wanted to have a burial and wanted something. So my brother's captain, who survived, was calling me all the time when he'd said, you're going to hear that this fireman was found. And this fireman goes, we're going to find your brother. We're going to find your brother. We're going to find your brother. Eventually. And that call came to my sister-in-law as I was walking into a hockey arena to watch my nephew play, my brother's son, play hockey. She's walking towards me, and she didn't have to say a word. I saw the look on her face. And I said, they found John. And she said, yeah. And it was bittersweet ain't the right word. I don't know what to say. It was awful.
Yeah.
You know, it was awful. I mean, the whole thing was awful. Every day was awful after 9/11, Mike. There's no way to put it. You tried to, you know, you're going to be strong and tough for your family. I mean, I had two men with two young children that lost their children, that those children lost their fathers. My sister-in-law was a nurse, and she was more steady. My buddy's wife could not believe what had happened to their lives, and she did not want to believe that he was gone. Neither did we. We were hoping, again, that there was a void in there, and they were going to find people who were trapped, you know, and they just never did. And eventually, I had to go back to work. I mean, I remember calling work and saying, I'm sitting home with my mom, or I'm sitting home with my buddy's wife, and what do? I got to get back to normal. But to this day, life has never been normal again. It's as normal as it can get. But
you know, unfortunately, you and I share watching our mothers lose a child. I remember at my brother's funeral, it was open casket. It was for our family, and my mom wanted to go in by herself first, and I can't describe the cry when she approached, what that was like. What was it like for you with your family and your mom in those days? It's one thing to lose a sibling. I can't even imagine the pain of losing a child.
I to this day, you know, I called my mother to see if she knew my brother's schedule on that day, and she did. She said, oh, John worked the night, as calm as could be. Even that night, I wound up at my mother's house on September 11th. Sitting in front of her, how calm she was. Shocking. But the worst ever was, after my brother's body was found, to see a casket with your brother's name on it and to watch it go into the ground is one of the hardest things I've ever watched a family do. And we've buried my father, we've buried aunts and uncles, but he was a hero. Mm-hmm. He was a hero, not just to me, but I mean, I have a big Italian family, to all of us. And to watch that was really the hardest thing. His church service, my son, whose middle name is John, after my brother, he cried a bucket of tears, and we could not stop crying. My sister-in-law gave her like a 7, 8, 9-minute speech and didn't cry. I gave a 1.5-minute speech and barely got through it at his funeral. It was awful, Mike. Part of me is gone. I lost my best friend. I lost my brother. And I watched my buddy's wife and my buddy's mother go through just awful what they witnessed and had to go through every day. My buddy's father, his whole body just broke down, and he died 6 months after 9/11. He lost the cream of the crop, and he couldn't handle it. His body couldn't handle it, and he passed away.
You know, the other thing we didn't talk about is, and maybe you can speak to this, is there were still things going on in that city. There were still emergencies that were going on in the days that followed. And how did they answer those calls for service? How did they take care of still doing a firefighter's job, a paramedic's job? How do you do that job and still deal with what's happening at ground zero? Do you know how that happened?
Everyone was pretty much on duty. You know, all the guys that weren't on duty were at the firehouse, and they were either at ground zero or riding the truck. I offered several times to the officers, if you need me on the rig, just let me know. I'll do whatever. Coverage was kind of thin, but I'm sure emergencies were down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
you still have health emergencies. People get sick, or
absolutely.
Car crashes. Possibly people are still driving in the city. There's still things that happen.
Yeah.
That's a part of the job, I think, that whenever we hear locally when there's an officer involved shooting, or an officer loses their life, or firefighters have lost their lives, that grieving process of the brotherhood during a time when they still are dedicated to making sure the job still gets done.
Mike, one of the nicest things anyone ever said to me happened about 3 years after 9/11. A lot of the guys had been going through hazmat training because they kind of were prepped for this. Not so much planes hitting buildings, but toxic gases, nuclear bombs in New York. They were prepping for terrorism, and guys were afraid. And after this happened, a lot of the young guys were talking about getting out. They were scared. And 3 years afterwards, I had gone back to New York for a promotion party. One of the guys that I had worked with was getting promoted to captain. And one of the young guys at the time came up to me and he said, Mike, when you and Neil walked into the firehouse, a lot of us felt like it's going to be okay. Mike and Neil are back. And, I tell my wife all the time, it doesn't sound like much, but for me, that was one of the nicest things I'd ever heard.
Mike, you mentioned that, and think of how many people sitting home became soldiers that on September 10th would never think of becoming a soldier.
Pat Tillman.
Yeah.
Would never think.
Best example.
I met a guy whose family owned a law firm in New Jersey, and he had just come back from being in Afghanistan. And he says, I'm a lawyer, but on September 12th, I became a soldier. And same thing with firemen. There are kids who wanted to become a fireman because of 9/11. Because you're doing something heroic every day. And that's what I said. Every day my brother went to work. There's no guarantee he was going to come home. Every day. So, it was harder for me to accept Jimmy just working at his desk, sitting in an office, just doing his job. And one of the worst things about that day is on Memorial Day 2002, the New York Times ran an article, and they had pieced together between phone calls and maybe emails and voicemails timeline of where people were. And somebody by the name of Rosenblum got in touch with his wife, and she tells the story that she's yelling at him to get out of the building. And he says, well, we're on the 104th floor, and we're trying to figure out how to get air. We're smashing windows. we've taken off our shirts and stuck them in the vents. He says, but there's a few guys here, and I want you to call their wives. The second name he mentioned was my buddy Jimmy. That they're trying to figure out how to survive. And that kills me, that I'd rather have them die instantly. That these people were up there knowing they couldn't get out, couldn't go down, so what do you do? And that's why people were jumping. I mean, they were taking life into their own hands. You're going to stand there and burn to death? And he was alive because she talked to him again, or yelled at him again to get out, and he said, there's no place for us to go. And that was like at 10:20, 6 minutes before that building came down. So he was alive that whole time, trying to get out, knowing he had a wife and children home, and I presume Jimmy the same thing, trying to do everything. And he worked with some massive guys. And if there was anybody who could get out, these guys could rip down walls to get out, but there was just no place to go. So that's one of the horror remembrances of that day, is these guys fought to get out for an hour and a half.
There's a guy I met named Earl who wrote a book, who was not from New York but was in the towers that day, and he tells the story of getting out of that building. But he said when we got to the lobby of the World Trade Center, everybody wanted out, and there were firefighters at the doors holding people back, and we couldn't understand why they wouldn't let us out. They were watching for jumpers so that people that jumped weren't landing on the people running out of the building. And he said they would wait until there was a pause. They would open the doors, and we would have to jump over remains of people to get to safety. And the firefighters had to stand there and guard those doors so that people were not landing on top of other people. I can't even imagine that kind of...
That's how the fire department chaplain died. Mm-hmm. Father Michael Judge was hit by a jumper.
You were in that business, and I can't even imagine that the better choice is to jump out a window than face what's inside that building.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's... God, I pulled a guy in and off an air conditioner once at the Tudor Hotel on the 12th floor. I was standing out on the air conditioner in his room, and my buddy Ronnie Book and I, Ronnie who died in 9/11, he and I pulled this guy in off an air conditioner, saved his life. He was ready to jump.
The option for him was to be outside on an air conditioner as opposed to whatever was inside that building.
Yep.
So I want to talk about the anger. When that's all part of the process. The shock of that day, we're all, I mean, I can hear in your voices. I know what you both sound like on a normal day. I mean, the subdued voice and what you're remembering. But when did it turn to anger? Can you remember when it turned to anger?
For me, I remember when I got back, when I got off that plane, there was not one person that I met or spoke to that didn't want to grab a machine gun and go over there. And a year later, everybody wanted to hang President Bush. And it was like the whole world turned around, and it drove me nuts. It drove me nuts. It's like people were just forgetting about that horror and accepting the fact that, well, you know, it's Bush, you know, it's his problem. He started it. He did this. He did that. That just struck me as just horrible. I was very angry about it.
For someone who spent their entire life risking it to save strangers, it had to be so foreign to you that the opposite was happening, that people just were so, they just wanted to get back to their own comfortable life, that was just okay to, not forgive and forget, but forget.
Yeah.
What about you?
Pretty quickly. I mean, it was hard to be angry in front of children, in front of my mom, but pretty quickly, Mike, so about a week after 9/11, I'm at my buddy's house, and his wife looks at me and said, you guys used to sit in our kitchen and talk about the terrorism that was happening around the world, and we weren't doing anything. And we'd say, eventually it's going to happen here. She literally said this to me, and she goes, and now my husband's dead. And she said, we need to know how this happened. Her and I started reading books. A lot of people don't want to hear this. This is on Clinton. This is on President Clinton. We had opportunities to get bin Laden. We had opportunities to do something about all the acts of October 20th. They blew up the coal. They blew up a building. They destroyed buildings in Saudi Arabia that had Americans in them. They in Africa, they took down diplomatic offices. This wasn't new. Bin Laden went on TV and said, America, we're coming to America. There was a lot of intelligence out there saying something is going to happen. And Jimmy and I would talk about this in front of his wife, who was making eggs and taking care of the children, and now her husband got killed because of terrorism. So was I angry? You bet your ass I was angry. I was angry to people who did this, but also the people here who didn't prevent it, who just let this terrorism go for 8 years. And then, like you said, they want to put it on Bush. What has Bush done? We had 8 years to get this guy as he's running around killing Americans all across the globe, blowing up buildings, blowing up a naval ship. What was our response to that? Has there ever been a response to that? So, yeah, I was angry. I'm still angry. I lost my brother and best friend, and how many lives have been ruined because of that day, Mike? Your brother's gone.
Yeah.
How many people have brothers who joined and are gone?
My mother, my brother was killed on Memorial Day on Monday. I went home to Florida on Tuesday. And Wednesday or Thursday, we did a press conference because they set it up so we didn't have to tell the story a bunch of times. And my mother couldn't go to the press conference. And she said, I'm afraid they'll ask me something, and I'm going to say something I'll regret. So she had the presence of mind in that grief, in that anger, to not say something that she would regret later, which I always thought that's a trait I don't have. But neither. she had that ability.
Let me just say one thing.
Go ahead.
Clinton skated away from this like he had nothing to do with it. He knew. He was called. And as soon as 9/11 happened, he knew it was bin Laden. He knew it was bin Laden. This should have been stopped way before. You know about the people here flying planes. Didn't want them to land. That information got written down and put on somebody's desk, and nothing happened with it. The 20th hijacker. We talk about FISA warrants. They couldn't get a warrant to go into this guy's apartment. He's not even a U.S. citizen, and look at his computer and see what the hell is this guy up to. The 20th hijacker that never made it on a plane. Well, guess what? September 12th, they went into his apartment and found out that he was the 20th hijacker. But our laws prevented us from a non-U.S. citizen of searching his place. And what's going on now with U.S. citizens? So it was beyond. The more her and I read, we passed books back and forth, it was obvious that we didn't do enough to prevent this, that the anger stayed with me till right now, Mike, 22 years later, 21 years later.
What's interesting, though, what you've done in the years since, coaching and the other things you've done, and every time I've been with you somewhere and we've spoken together on 9/11, when you've given a speech, and you turn it to something positive, and I know that you're not making it up. What is it? I'm going to start with you. What is it about that? Is it about the memory of the people you lost that day, that you want to make sure you treat that the right way? What is it that motivates you to use it in the positive way you have? You talked about what you said to your football team or what you say to other people. What motivates that positivity out of such a horrible, horrible time?
I guess, Mike, what you can say is that God has a plan. Sometimes horrible things happen, and as bad as this was, and still is for a lot of us, what can we do to use it for something positive? How do I motivate young men to want to still do these types of jobs and still care about this great country and try and turn things around and understand why we need to turn things around? That's how I would put it.
The work ethic part of it. We've talked about this. One of the things I really liked the most about working with you was it was a team of people. And it didn't matter if you were the electrician or the AC guy or a carpenter or whatever it was. If you weren't dedicating to getting the job done, then you didn't want to work with those people. But at the same time, when it came time to collect money or do something else, you fiercely defended all of us. But you always had a high expectation for people. Is that part of it? I'm trying to figure out if that's who you were that made you the fireman, which I know we talked a little bit about, or if it was the fireman that made you the contractor that way.
I would say a little bit of both. I mean, you got to be a certain guy to want to be a fireman. Mm-hmm. And then once you go through that, and once you've lived that, it makes you a different person. I won't say a better person, but it makes you a different person. And for me, yeah, I learned a lot about teamwork in the fire department. A lot. And it carried over into my construction knowledge, and that's why, like you point out, when we worked as a team, we had 100 guys on a job. And I fiercely defended every one of you.
Yeah.
And that's, one for all for one. That's how we do it.
And for you, what we share is carrying on the legacy of talking about our brothers, you and your best friend, but your brother as well, and not letting people forget, not just that they died serving, but how they lived. Mm-hmm. I know that you just described being angry. I'm angry at times. But what motivates you? Because I've never heard you finish a public speaking event where it wasn't a message of being grateful and of positive and patriotic. And what drives that?
Well, just think of the firemen going into those buildings, right? Think of the soldiers that went to Afghanistan and Iraq. There's a lot of heroes in this country every day, and you don't hear about them every day. The best quote ever was when the Staten Island newspaper called my mother to talk about my brother. She said, "We all knew he was a hero before this happened. Now the whole world knows he was a hero." There's a lot of heroes out there every day. And that day, as like I said before, it's a miracle that only 3,000 people died. How many people were rescued that day? That there was a plan, that God did have a plan. The people on that plane that took down a plane prayed before they did that. There was the planes weren't overcrowded. So, and a lot of people got rescued. I've read a lot of stories about people rescuing each other. Everyday citizens becoming heroes. So I still believe in my country. And you know what, Mike? It was really hard for me for a long time to enjoy my life. How could I be happy when my family isn't happy, my friend's wife isn't happy, the kids are growing up without? It was really, really hard. Again, it's part of the reason I moved here. I had to get away from that. I had to get away from going into the city and there's no building. That building burnt for 3 months. There was smoke coming out of the ground. That was hard. So, I had to get living my life, and I know today Jimmy is happy with what I do. So is my brother. I've tried to live a really, really good life. And one thing I learned from 9/11 that I never knew before was how much I could love another man. Not my mother, not my children, not my grandmother, another just friend. I realized how much I loved Jimmy when he was taken away. And I never forget that. And I tell my friends today that I truly love, that I love them. And that's one of the things I make sure is I want people to know how much I care about them. And I've been able to share empathy, but also understand grief with other people who lose loved ones. I get it now. Before that, I didn't get it as much. Everybody loses a parent, they get old and sick, but to lose a brother, and a lot of people lose loved ones, a lot, in tragic ways. And I try to show them empathy and understanding.
The circumstances, though, in the loss you suffered and the loss you suffered on that day is one that the country embraced. It's one thing, it may be a blessing and a curse, and it was a little bit for us. When something happens to a family, many times they can shut the world out and grieve the way they grieve. In this situation, it's not possible. The embrace of the country, this happened to America. Mm-hmm. You said at the very beginning of this, you went to funerals every day.
Yeah.
These were people that you knew better than you knew some of your closest friends here.
Absolutely.
What do you remember now? What do you think about now, these years later? So here we are, bringing it up again, and we're talking about it because I think it's so necessary. But what do you take with that? What do you think about in these times?
When I was there, you saw this outpouring of concern, I mean, celebrities coming to the firehouse, and football, the Giants were there, the Yankees were there. Ginger from Gilligan's Island kissed me, you know. I mean, it was insane. And people did care, you know, and it did help some. It did. It helped looking on the streets and seeing trucks driving by with the American flag out and people just uniting, and you know, that was great. You know, but at night you still go home and you can't forget. You just can't. You lost so many friends and so many mentors, guys that were so good to you. And, you know, I'll hold that for the rest of my life.
Was there ever any survivor's guilt?
Oh, it was horrible. And they told us it would happen. They had psychiatrists come to the firehouse when we were off duty and tell us you're gonna experience dreams of being buried alive. You're gonna, you know, go through these heart palpitations, and everything they said happened. I mean, it was rough. It was rough for a while.
How was it on your family? Because I know you're very close to your family. How was it for them in those days after?
They were just so happy I was back. You know, nobody knew what was going to happen. I mean, all these people died, and here I am. Everyone's trying to get out of New York, and I'm going there.
And nobody knew if there was more attacks planned.
Right.
That's one thing. We had no idea what was coming next.
Right. You know, so when I came home, the house was decorated, and, you know, it was nonstop people coming to the house. And, you know, I mean, they were okay. They were just glad to have me home.
Every day at McAvoy's house is the 4th of July. Go into his house, and it's the American flag is everywhere, inside and out. Was that always the way you were, and this just amplified it, or did what happened make you understand the sacrifice that it takes to fly that flag?
I was always patriotic. My dad was a World War II Marine. First thing he did every morning was hang out the flag. That's just how I was. But this exacerbated it and grew into what it is now, where I truly appreciate the freedoms that I have, the freedoms that our soldiers give us, and I love my country and always will. And that day, my brother didn't know he was going to war. That was war. They won. The war started on September 11th, and he was there. And again, how many soldiers, how many guys on September 10th were not soldiers became soldiers? So I really appreciate the American freedoms that we have each and every day. And I like to be patriotic and remind people, this is Memorial Day, this is Veterans Day, this is July 4th. All of those things are, as a country, we should absolutely celebrate and remember. And I completely believe in that, and will, you know, when I die in my casket, I want an American flag in it.
It is, I guess I want to ask both of you, first of all, thanks for doing this, but two such different personalities that I know fairly well. Why do this year after year? I know for you, it's not, you don't talk about much of yourself ever, but why do this? I know I'm going to get two different answers because of the two different personalities, but I appreciate you doing it with me this year, but why continue to do this every year?
We can never forget this. I mean, never. The country should never forget this. And I'll do it till my last day.
Are you concerned that it's not being remembered properly? Not celebrated or honored, I mean remembered properly.
Yeah, especially with the latest news that you've just been delivering about, you know, what's going on with the guys that orchestrated this whole thing. I mean, that's ludicrous. That's insanity.
I'm going to jump in here. How could you give a guy who's bragged about it was his idea to use planes, it was his idea to do this.
Talking about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah, KSM. And you're going to talk to his attorneys about a plea deal?
Did you get one of the letters to the family asking you what your opinion was?
No.
I would imagine.
Got an email.
Oh, did you?
But it was already happening by the time I got it. It was a little late from a law firm that I'm in touch with. It's sickening. sickening. And you talk about forgetting. Are we going to forget that people jumped from these towers to their death? We're going to forget about the women. Maybe you didn't see it here, but New York City, the news was just women looking for their husbands with their pictures, stapling them to telephone poles, putting them on fences all over Manhattan. Everywhere you went, there was 100 pictures of people, thousands of pictures of people who were missing. You know, and how could we work a plea deal with the guy who wanted this done? I mean, he should have been killed 21 years ago. You know, they wanted intelligence from him. Okay, we got it. Now you're dead. That's it. He's admitted to doing this. We know he did it. We know without a doubt that this was his deal. So that's hard. Why I speak about it? I want people to remember. It was like Mike said, the days and you couldn't buy an American flag. Every house had their flag out. Every car had a flag on it. I mean, patriotism. The firehouse got food. Talk about celebrities coming to the firehouse with food and letters from firemen all across the world. You know, and firemen from across the world came to dig down at you know, our soldiers were so deeply respected, and we went to war with a real good reason to go to war and avenge this. I met a captain of a special forces group that just retired, a full-blown colonel. They came to my brother's firehouse from North Carolina. They drove to meet and sit with the survivors of this. I got to go to Fort Bragg. I mean, this was patriotism at its best, and it's left us. And that's the sad thing. So I bring this up. My brother was a hero. My best friend died just being going to work. And if you don't remind people of this, history can repeat itself.
I've talked with so many people in this podcast and on the air about their 9/11 memories. Derek Hall, the president of the Diamondbacks. We just had Gonzo, Luis Gonzalez, who hit the game-winning hit to win the World Series.
If the infield's back, it's an out. Jeter's playing on the edge of the grass, it's an out.
You know what? There's a lot of ifs, and I'm glad you're not bitter about the loss.
No, not at all.
But to hear them tell the story, and every time we would have a good time talking about their careers and everything else. But I always brought it up because that was such a significant time for everyone, and they had an opportunity to come from Arizona and be in New York City relatively quickly after 9/11, and their entire mood changes, every one of them, and the only thing that they can talk about is the respect they have for people like you and the memory of being in such a significant place. And it made the World Series, which is a dream of every kid that's ever played baseball, pale in comparison. And how they felt in Yankee Stadium watching George Bush throw that first pitch out, and it was just an American moment, that unifying moment. And to hear those people tell that story, it changes their mood immediately when they start to tell the stories. Is that what, I mean, I hope that lives in people forever.
It does. I hope it does. You know, New Yorkers remember it. You were there, you were part of it. It's part of your DNA, and you'll never go away. But, you know, as a country, have we forgotten it? You know, it's every once in a while I'll meet someone. I wear these bracelets with my brother and best friend on it, and someone will say, you know, and ask me about it. And they go right into, well, I was in California watching it on TV, so I can't picture what it was like to be there.
Right.
And even our own president wanted people to get back to, stock market opened up again, like wanted people to get back to normal life. Well, for a lot of people, you could. For Mike and I, we couldn't. My family couldn't. A lot of people in New York could not go back. I went to work going, I don't want to be here. You know, it was 2 weeks after 9/11. I sit at my desk now, I'm going to act like nothing's happened. Then you get there, New York City was a graveyard. That's what it felt like. It was one giant city graveyard. A woman that sat 10 feet from me, right outside my office, her cousin got killed. Another guy I work with, his brother got killed. I mean, you didn't go to work and everything just changed. These memories are unbelievable. Another guy whose brother was a fireman who survived the collapse. He was down at the Trade Center when the building came down, and he ran out. So this was not, you know, something you'll ever forget. And you want the people to remember, the heroism, but also the patriotism that followed.
I don't think The only thing I can try to compare it to in viewing the sacrifice for not being there, you both were there. When I was able to go on the anniversary of D-Day, a trip to Normandy, and you can be on Omaha Beach or Utah Beach or Point du Hoc, and you can stand on the beach and look back where the gun turrets were, and you can see how the Nazis were dug in, and what those soldiers had to endure to get from those Higgins boats to any kind of safety. They had to run toward the gunfire in order to get to any kind of safety. And until you're standing on that beach and seeing it with your own eyes, it's the only time I had even a glimpse of what that day meant, how that changed the world, but what that meant to those young men on those beaches. Unless you've been to Ground Zero, anybody's been there to see the memorial or any of it, I don't think we can fathom, even you telling the stories and you telling the stories, that the average person can fathom what that was like.
So, Mike, when the memorial opened, I went to it about a month later.
And your brother's ladder is in that.
Fire truck is there.
Is in there.
3 is there. And there's the voice call of Patty Brown saying, we're on the 44th floor.
Right.
We've got some severely burned people, and we're going up. You know those guys didn't think they were coming out, but they're still going up. And I stood there and had the video, and I'm next to the fire. I'm emotional, but I'm not losing it. I lost it. I literally lost it. And that's 10 years later. That was 10 years. I fell to my knees. People came over to me and were hugging me, not even knowing what was happening. They just knew the emotion of seeing my brother's fire truck all destroyed that he used to drive in this memorial, and then the video of Patty Brown, a video of Ground Zero with his voice on it. And this video of my brother's fire truck in the rubble.
Yeah,
there.
I've seen that picture.
If you haven't seen the truck, it's twisted like a beer can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it took me 20 years after it happened before I could go to that museum. And I made it about halfway through, and I said to my wife, I got to go.
I can't do it. I spent about a half hour. And I left my backpack. I got almost all the way home, all the way to where I was staying in a hotel. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go all the way back there, because I was just gone. I mean, it was overwhelming. I've gone back again. Same thing. I couldn't go through it all the way. Neither could my wife. I wanted her to see it. It's done fabulously for what it is. It really pays respect to everybody, but it's a horrific event, so it's not good.
And to what you both were saying about those firefighters in that building, that guy Earl, I told you about in his book, but he told this story to a group of us when he was in town. He said we were 4, and I don't know how big those stairwells were, but he said we were about 3 or 4 people wide on the stairs walking down. And he said everybody was quiet, and you were making sure you didn't fall because you didn't want to cause a domino effect and knock everybody down in the stairwells. And he said, and down in the distance, we heard people laughing and clapping, and we thought we were hearing things because there was nothing funny about what was happening. He said, and then a few minutes later, we saw why. Firefighters were coming up the steps, and people were moving to the side so they could get up the steps. And that's when they knew that if they could get up to us, we can get down to the ground. And he said, we all made it out of that building. And he said, when we turned around and looked back, we realized none of them did.
Uh-huh.
That one fireman's a very famous picture. Somebody took a picture of him going up.
Yeah, the young guy.
Yeah, going up, and he had a hose on his back.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, think of that, 50, 60 pounds of going up how many flights of stairs?
And he looked like a kid. I mean, he looked like a kid.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as an insulting way,
No.
but he looked like such a young man doing his job.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, there's so many guys. You talked about that documentary. He was a Frenchman who wanted to make a movie about a Proby.
Right.
And how many guys in that video are gone.
Yeah.
Are gone. And how, and Michael talked about it, when you look at them, how calm the leadership of the fire department was. This was nothing anybody had ever seen. It's a complete disaster, and they're just giving orders like it's, a normal day. And that, to me, shows you the discipline of the fire department and how, even though they're not prepared for this, they were prepared for something. And they just went about their business, and everybody went about their business. And it's
Did
sad.
their job.
Did their job.
Yeah.
Did their job.
And which is probably the biggest compliment you guys can give each other, is that they just did their job.
Yep.
You consider all of those guys heroes.
Absolutely.
But you hate it when someone says it about you.
Yeah.
It's the craziest thing. Because I will tell you, I've always, you and I have talked about it, I've always admired just the way you handle yourself, but the more you're willing to talk about that day, you lived your life as a hero. Just because you didn't perish doesn't mean you're any less a hero. Like you said about your brother, I'd say the same thing about you. You were a hero your whole life. They just found out about it, unfortunately, that day. Yeah. And I'm honored that both of you would do this. I know it's not easy, but I do think it's necessary. And so I want to thank you guys for doing it. No, go ahead. You get the last word.
There's one story that, again, I spent a lot of time in my brother's. I used to go to my brother's firehouse. He'd be working. I'd say hi, talk to the guys for a few minutes. Sometimes I'd have something to eat. But I wound up spending a lot of time in the firehouse after 9/11. And one guy said to me, one time your brother was going to be given a medal, and the chief called him in. He said, hey, and he said, why? And whatever they said he did. I don't remember at this point. And he goes, well, that's my job. I don't deserve anything. This is what I'm supposed to do. And they're like, oh, no, you want to have about it? And he goes, no, I don't want it. And when he got it, he just stuck it in his locker. Like, I don't want to pin it on my lapel. That's who he was.
Now, you're nodding your head. I know you didn't know Mike's brother, but it sounds like you knew Mike's brother. I mean, it sounds like he'd just be one of the guys.
I did the same thing. I turned it down, said, I don't want it. Give it to one of the truck guys. I'm an engine man. We don't get medals.
Yeah, that's who he was. He lived his life like that. You know, he back in the day before cell phones, if you were pulled over with your blinkers on the side of the road, John pulled over. How can I help?
Oh, yeah.
That's what he would do all the time. How many guys came up to me at his wake and said, your brother was my best friend? I looked at my sister-in-law and said, how do you have 12 best friends? Yeah. As a guy, you have one or two. It says at least 12 guys have said that. Yeah. 12 guys. How much they love my brother. How much they one guy walked up to me and said he was the bravest, toughest fireman I've ever met, and only a 107-story building could take him out. I'll never forget that. And this guy was as big as a house. Because my brother, he was tough, and he was gritty, and he took his job serious all the time. And when guys didn't, he let them know. Again, more stories about him getting in captains' faces, or you know, they'd call out for, what is that when you're going to go to lunch?
Chow.
No, it's a number. 10, you're going 10.
Oh, yeah, going 10-8.
10-8, right? So his captain on a truck one day says, oh, we're going 10-8. And then a call comes in about a fire right where they're, it's a call, right? So John says, hey, let's go get off at 10. The guy's like, no, we're on 10-8. John goes, no, we're not. And they did. When they got back in the firehouse, my brother got in front of this guy. I don't know if he's a chief or a captain. And the fireman had to hold my brother back. We're paid to fight fires. We can always eat whenever. You don't go on 10-8 if a fire comes in. Oh, the stories, and that's what a lot of them are like that. They went through walls that day to save people. And it's sad that, 343 didn't get out.
Do you still think that's in people?
Oh, yeah. Firemen?
In general, do you think there still is that in people, that we have that capacity to do what you're talking about? Self-sacrifice, sense of duty, something bigger than yourself. I've got a job to do. Not
everyone.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
But it's still that we still see people in public service. But in our business, is there still that dedication to someone say, I said I'm going to do the job, I'm going to do the job?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would say yeah. I mean, maybe not as many. It's not as prevalent. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Economy will wipe you out and one thing or another, but I still think that's in people. It just, sometimes it takes a lot more to get it out of some people,
I just think that the memories of this and the stories that you're both telling about your brothers is, there is something in the human nature that we honor, and which is self-sacrifice. That you can be counted on. And I don't know that if there would be one thing I would want people to say about me someday, is that I could count on him. And I don't know that that's the truth about me. And the two of you have had so many people in your lives that there's no doubt that you knew for a fact that if you needed them, they were going to be right there.
I would tell a story if I met someone new. They'd be like, oh, you got any brothers? Like, yeah, my brother John. Well, what about him? I said, if I was stuck in Pennsylvania at 3 o'clock in the morning, he's the one I'd call. And I said, if he couldn't come, one of his friends would show up because they probably owed him a favor. That's who my brother John was. And when I said that, I didn't just say it, I meant it. That's who he was. People owed him favors. Yeah. Because of how good he was to other people, and he showed up for them. So yeah, but getting back to the one thing 9/11 did bring about, I think people are really on edge. That when something starts to happen, they run. You know, get out of the building, go away from trouble. There's only a few people that run into trouble. There's only a few people that are going to go into the trouble when everyone's running out. And I think 9/11 made people a little bit more, I'm getting out of here. Yeah. You know, instead of I want to stay and help. Even though I said there's a lot of heroes on 9/11, even ordinary citizens, but I think today some people can be self-preservation first. You have to be a special person to not care about yourself and want to go into the fire, go into, you know, gunfire, whatever it is. Go into trouble. It has to be inherited, and I think my family, from my father down, we all had that. We're going into the trouble if it has to be. And I've always been, you know, the guy for the underdog. And, you know, I want to be there when something happens.
Well, I can't imagine ever talking about 9/11, ever, without talking with the two of you. And I'm so happy that I was able to get you in the same room. And thank you both for doing this. I think that this is going to be very educational for people. And I think you've honored the people you love very well today.
And Mike, thank you for every year remembering. Thank you for the phone calls about, I'm going to do something this year. What day do you have time? I mean, that comes from you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I'm never going to forget. I'll never forget. And you guys are such a big part of that.